Lenn. Lenn, buddy, you couldn't be scary if you tried, man. Hiya folks, it's me Lenn, and welcome back to another rambling for about an hour and a half. Okay, so just like Stan over here, how many of you really remember Capcom's Darkstalkers lineup of fighting games during the mid-90s? Anyone? Well, everyone besides Aaron, because Capcom fighting games are just his jam. I'm gonna take a wild guess and say you either heard of them, if you're a Capcom fan, but never really played them. Or just haven't because some of the ports are kinda obscure outside of Japan. Capcom. We all know who they are at least, correct? Of course we do. They're the guys who gave us a blue armoured boy kicking some old guy's ass, a fighting game where Jean-Claude Van Damme played an American military sergeant.
And I'm going to kick that son of a bitch Bison's ass so hard that the next Bison wannabe is gonna feel it.
And we all know I sung the highest of praises earlier this year when I got to play the adventures of a badass gentleman turned into one jokester uncle who you think is pretty cool at a young age. Anywho, I think we should get into the game in question today. So first of all, in a land
Far away.
Fighting game king and queens Capcom had an idea to create an all-new fighting game franchise around a gothic horror format with using characters that would take on appearances of Halloween favourites like a vampire, a Frankenstein's monster, a werewolf, a zombie, a nun that takes on the features of a cat, and a bat-themed seductive succubus that makes Lenn want to feel the acne with her. You know, just to name a few of these characters. Jeez, I'm such a loser. So y'all ready for some mental gymnastics? Get ready for a whole frickin' run around a mental gymnasium, cause Darkstalkers history is just a tad messy. In chronological order, Darkstalkers 1 was released in July 1994 as an arcade cabinet that made its way to consoles on the PlayStation 1 in 1996. However, I heard that this port isn't too good since it takes out some of the animations and it doesn't run smoothly when compared to Capcom's CP System 2 chip, which was a new type of chip that they developed for most of their arcade games around this time, like Street Fighter 2 Turbo for example. I mean heck, this arcade chip would be used all the way up to 2003. So yeah, it was pretty damn buff. So all in all, from what I've played, you know, since Night Warriors and the Resurrection Collection is the exact same game with more content, it's a pretty sound introduction to the Darkstalkers franchise and built up a nice reason to want to continue the series. Then there's the second game, or Night Warriors Darkstalkers Revenge, or Darkstalkers the Night Warriors. It depends on where you're from, I guess. Anyway, it was released in March 1995. This game was exactly the same as before with the same endings and characters, but with the additions of having some new characters, two being boss characters, like the Flaming Demon Pyron, the vengeful Demon Hunter Donovan Bane, and the mechanical giant Huitzil.
I tell you what.
What more can I say? It's just Darkstalkers 1 but built upon. And it's now I can understand why they only brought this game in Darkstalkers 3 to Darkstalkers Resurrection on PS3 and Xbox 360 back in 2013. They're more or less the same game. And now we have the third title in the series, simply called Darkstalkers 3 over here in the West. Whilst back in the opposite direction, it was named Vampire Savior, the Lord of Vampire. Now, there are other various conversions and re-releases in the series, going across PlayStation like I mentioned earlier, the Sega Saturn, and this was the tad messy part I mentioned earlier. And these are most likely just Capcom's attempt at reaching out the series to other sources so the game can be better recognised. Now, if you're wondering how I found out about this series, well, it was just last year in the summer actually. I was given a PlayStation Store voucher by one of my good friends Alex Galax for my birthday and decided to buy the PSP ports of Darkstalkers, the Chaos Tower. It was a compilation of all the versions of the games along with all the conversions of all three games that include all the previous characters and has a new tower system to boot. Needless to say, I had an absolute blast while playing this around the pool when I was on vacation, and it is my ideal way of revisiting these games personally. Now, just why are we looking at the third Darkstalkers game only? Well, I think it's best to revisit this game since it was the last in the series and we couldn't see Darkstalkers ever again bar a few art books, ports, a shit cartoon, a decent OVA by the same guys who made the Street Fighter 2 animated movie, and of course, the mountain of ports and crossovers and cameos of some characters being in other games like Marvel vs. Capcom, Marvel vs. SNK, Puzzle Fighter, etc. Mostly being Morrigan and Felicia, but yeah. Alright, let's stop stalking around in the dark and feel the acme together. Whatever that means. As I delve into what I consider to be one of the most unique and underrated fighting games of all time. Darkstalkers 3 played on the PlayStation 3 through Darkstalkers Resurrection. Oh, and if you're wondering why this isn't a double header since Night Wars is also on there. Look man, I'm busy these days, I don't got time. Okay, so when it comes to the game's story, it really isn't anything amazingly out there in terms of plot, so don't expect a normal story analysis structure of my older reviews like the Sonic Adventure games and the Spyro games reviews. Because for a fighting game, I don't think it's entirely possible to make an entire essay about a fighting game's plot. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still a consistently structured plot, and it does work very well for what it is, but the main thing that really does carry this game's entire plot is its characters. And it's clearly projected in the gameplay, more on that later. So for the actual story's beginning, it all starts with a dark figure demon named Jeddah Dalma, a member of one of the three noble families of Makai. Jeddah himself had a fear that if the future of Makai was under rule of the Ainsland family, Morgan's family, more specifically Makai being under the rule of Morgan's foster father, Belial, then the demon realm would collapse and basically self-destruct. As a result, Jeddah became soul hungry and eventually decided to take matters in his own hands and seek out... Are you ready for this? Are you sitting? No really, you gotta be sitting for this. The Fetus of God! Since we have the starting part of the plot out of the way, for this review I'll be going through every character in this game's roster of creative nightmare creatures. Actually, that's another game I've heard good things about. Hey Stan, add that to the list of games I say I want to play but never really will get around to. And I'll be touching upon each character's storyline briefly, so apologies if there's a certain detail or story plot point I may have missed out, since this game is of course a classic 2D fighting game, where the story is mainly presented in external media like instruction manuals, comics, TV shows, etc. So all I have to go off of is the game's cutscenes and Darkstalkpedia. Yeah. Anyways. Alright, so first up is the babe who pretty much represents the entire franchise whenever the series crosses over to other games. Morgan Ainsland. And guess what? You've gained massive respect points from me, Capcom. Born in 1678, Andin Makai is a member of royal blood in the Ainsland family with the responsibility of having to protect the future of a self-destructing Makai in her hands. She spends most of her time outside exploring in the human realm, or Earth, and likes to somewhat ignore the responsibility and just overall be herself without being tied down by anything, as her flirtatious and carefree attitude characteristics that Succubi are often given tells us. In this game, Morgan awakes from her slumber from the previous game, which I'm just going to call Night Wars at this point, to see that the Ainsland castle has been plunged into Jeddah's newly created dimension and spends the game seeking out Jeddah himself. By the end of the game, Morgan finds a doppelganger that resembles her quite vaguely, and we'll get into more detail on her later on, but as for now, Morgan observes the doppelganger as she's essentially Morgan's other half when her powers split from her at birth. Mainly because it was decided by her foster father that it'd be dangerous to give her all that power at such a young age and have it be kept until she was much older. That was until the power source began to grow a split personality and its own life form. So as for now, I really like Morgan, as you can clearly tell. And with my hormonal splurging aside, she's a really cool character to play as and really interesting to delve into her backstory with. I really love her character design with the suit she wears too. Her colour scheme is pretty pleasing to the eye, especially with the nice use of turquoise green for her hair, and just being my personal favourite fighter in this game. And yeah, maybe even one of my favourite fighting game characters of all time too. She's certainly unique in this aspect, and I really do love this character. There's a reason that this character is used whenever Darkstalkers is meant to be represented in another, especially the Marvel vs. Capcom games. Next up is the Canadian legend of Bigfoot, named, well, Sasquatch. Yeah, pretty on the nose there actually. Anyways, Sasquatch lived his life in peace alongside his brethren Sistrin, and cousin Trin, and uncle Trin, and auntie Trin, or whatever Trin there is. He lives with his people in the wilderness in Canada as a Bigfoot character typically would, and yeah, it sort of works. After returning home from the previous events of Night Warriors when he was out in search of a power source, he realises that his entire tribe had been missing from their village and he becomes full of rage obviously. Yeah, that's his motive. The boy's a big guardian and he wants to go find his people. Much like his entire concept, it's straight to the point and I like it. Just after confronting Jeddah, he finds his tribe locked within a room with an iron door on the outside. And just when he smacks down the said door like a big old tree in the woods, he finds all of his people completely fine and actually praising Jeddah for offering them all the bananas they wanted. Completely unaware of the fact that he's actually evil and wants to completely rule the universe. Talk about blissfully unaware. Yeah, Sasquatch is a pretty cool character all in all. He fits well as a character in this roster, and his muted colour scheme really helps make him stand out as one of the more larger, bustling boys of the roster. So yeah, that's pretty much Sasquatch. He's more or less as you come to expect a Bigfoot character to be. And yeah, I don't think he'll be making any snow cones.
Snow cone? No, don't worry. It's lemon.
Another returning fighter from Night Warriors is Rikyo. He's a merman on a quest to find his way home after the events of the previous game where he had originally thought that all of his people had been wiped out and he was the only survivor against Pyron causing a natural disaster to his home in the ocean deep under the Amazon. When he defeated Pyron, he fell in love with another survivor of the attack, Aquaria, and then he dedicated his time to rebuilding his population residing in the ocean. However, in Darkstalkers 3, or Vampire Saver if you want to call it that, I'm just going to call it Darkstalkers 3 because I'm a Westerner and I'm clearly biased. Jeddah's machinations of messing around with dementias had sent his family missing and Rikyo desperately pulled a Finding Nemo and scurrying around to find them, later having him search in Jeddah's newly created dimension, the Magi-Jin, and eventually take him on himself. By the end of the story, Rikyo reunites with one of his children that he finds stuck in a vortex underwater, where he sees another one of his race of merpeople, leading Rikyo and his family to live with these newfound fishfolk. As for how I feel towards Rikyo is a really cool character too. I like his design being a ripped merman who is pure of heart and soul, just trying to find his family and protect his race and all. And I really love the use of spiked edges on his design to give off a sharp and pronounced silhouette. But is then brought back to being a neutral visual of a character when you see his cool greens and yellows in view. So yeah, I like Rikyo quite a bit, mainly since his intentions are somewhat inspirational and motivating in a way. Next we have my second favourite of the Darkstalkers characters, Lord Raptor. Raptor here was a young rock star who was murdered by a character that Jeddah came into contact with just before the events of this game, that being the Emperor named Ozon. In this game, however, he is still in search of gaining more souls to devour so he can build his strength and become a ruler himself, just as he planned in the previous game. And with Ozon being killed by Jeddah before he could get to him, Raptor made the decision to kill the person who had killed his master instead. And shortly after defeating Jeddah, Lord Raptor, accompanied by a small pufferfish-like creature, decides to take all of Jeddah's power. Unfortunately, Lord Raptor was being a little too gluttonous and took in way too much for him to handle and just ends up exploding? Okay. But he isn't dead, he can still speak. God, this guy got Gruntilda'd over here. I mean, I guess now he's just a disembodied head, so if another Darkstalkers game does come around, it's likely he might not be there as a fighter, but a lot of fans would be upset at that. Myself included, actually. And I'll explain why. I really love Lord Raptor as a character, since he's a metal guitarist who beats the absolute gunge out of his enemies with his stretchy and anatomically incorrect body twisting and turning like it does. His character design is obviously a clear tribute to the genre of rock and heavy metal, as he looks a lot like Iron Maiden's Eddie the Head. And if you know me, then you know that Iron Maiden is my absolute favourite band of all time. So seeing this fighting game character take after their mascot was really pleasant to see personally. All the while it's not coming off as a rip-off in any way. Also, this guy's a complete riot in the anime.
For a bunch of punks, you sure got some nasty habits and dark arts. Oh, the show ain't over yet. Don't you want to buy a t-shirt? What you say, kitty cat? You want that I should save you a couple of souls?
Thanks for the offer, but I'm not much for organized religion.
I'm kind of non-denominational myself.
Here we have the classic character trope of a person with a curse, and that being the martial artist John Talbane. The backstory of Talbane is pretty tragic. His mother was killed by one of Jedda's minions, his master was slaughtered by a group of bandits, his rage overcomes him and basically turns him into a werewolf. Yeah, and you have John Talbane as a result. In this game at least, John Talbane is on his quest to continue in his fighting spirit so he won't lose himself to his dark urges in his werewolf form. And as if it was some kind of metaphor, at the end of his story he comes across the dark embodiment of himself known as Dark Talbane. Well, I mean, even I use this trope of an evil doppelganger, so I can't complain, can I? And that's it for his story, really. The concept of Talbane himself is actually really cool. He has a pretty straightforward and simple character as far as martial artist turned werewolf goes. His grey fur and purple sweatpants combo seem to go well together since he's a creature that most likely lurks in the dark instead of the day. You know, as wolves normally do. And he's just another one of those characters you really feel for. Even in a game like Darkstalkers where there's not much story going on. But this game does a good job in getting the point across, and he's another one of my favourites from this game for certain. Next up is the really bizarre hybrid character that takes on the appearance of both a human girl and a bee. The backstory of QB is that she's the queen, in case you wonder what the Q was for in her name, advanced race of bees called the Soul Bees. The Soul Bees are inhabitant to the Magian realm, and were on the verge of extinction until the Jeddah came back and made his decision to combine his dimension with the Ainsland Castle. QB throughout the entire story had made it her life's purpose to impress Jeddah since he can promise the Soul Bee protection, and are fixated on that idea until she was met with a disappointing betrayal where Jeddah tries to absorb her soul instead. And with her story ending with Jeddah being defeated and the Soul Bees taking over the demon realm with a massive hive covering over Jeddah's dimension and apparently overpopulating with Soul Bee people, QB is kinda weird. I mean, I do like her character design and personality as this leader of a certain race of bees, creatures that you wouldn't really associate with any kind of revolutionary-like behaviour that are doing just that. But I honestly think there could be a bit more to her in terms of character. I think as a queen she could have had more quirks to her personality than just a mindless bee's brain put into the body of a human girl and set to fight against other Darkstalkers. But as for design, it works. I mean, the purple and yellow core colours accompanied by the accented whites are a nice bundle to colour this unique design of a humanised bee in. But the whole queen aspect isn't really in sight at all, which is quite strange since her name is of course QB. All in all, I think she's fine. Not amazingly outstanding, but if a new Darkstalkers game were to happen, you know, in the unlikely event that it'll actually happen, I would like to see a bit more royalty put into her character design and maybe even her personality too. But yeah, sorry any QB fans, I just don't feel the buzz. Next we got the fighting Chinese Yangshi Shonko. In Night Warriors, she was explained to be one of two twin girls who were taught martial arts at a young age. Her other sister being Mei Ling. One night after their master was murdered and her mother was trapped in limbo from forces sent by Jeddah, Shionko had turned herself into a Jiangshi, which translates to hopping zombie in English and is a form of an undead corpse in Chinese folklore. And Mei Ling turns into a form of a guard to accompany Shionko so she won't lose her way, before her body is dry. Anyways, so both her and Mei Ling are on a quest to find their mother and bring justice to the one who raided their village, murdered their master, and stored their mother away in limbo. And when they do eventually face off against Jeddah, they're met with a mysterious woman in a void, and just when they ask who that woman is, they're warped away and sent into another reality together where they now live a new life with parents on Earth. And it was actually done by their real mother to most likely keep them away from any harm, leaving their story on a somewhat bittersweet note. So Shionko is a character I really love in this game as well. I can't help but feel just totally somber after finishing her story and seeing that this may very well be her last appearance in the series. Potentially. Probably. And the last thing we see is them both returning to their parents as their real mother watches over them in the stars above, knowing that their children are living happily now. Shionko is a really cool looking character in my opinion. And I really love her cultural implementations of being a Jiangshi and having a colour scheme of bold yellows and purples taking the lead for her dress, and having big metal claws stick out of her sleeves. It's an overall appealing design and it makes her one of the most iconic characters from this game in my opinion, which may explain why she makes an appearance in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 as well. Overall, I think she's one of the most unique characters in one of Capcom's fighting games. And as for what's next for her, who really knows? Now we have Bishamon. Bishamon is a normal everyday human man who was corrupted and turned into an evil samurai warrior who has only one thing that overcomes him: his blade and a bloodthirst for murder. Bishamon had saw a set of armour one day at an antique store, and as time went on he began to see it appear around him more and more until the store owner told him that the armour chooses its host much like a venom symbiote. And when Bishamon was curious to try on the armour, he instantly became overcome by the evil surge from the armour, and his entire being had been taken away by Hanya, the armour of hatred, and Kien, the sword that sucks blood from its enemies. In Darkstalkers 3, Bishamon was roaming around until he found an old mural in Makai that showed more details on the armour and sword that Bishamon was wearing. And feeling like he would come across another person like himself, he seeks out to the mountains that the portal to Makai would be and wait there to tell the person about what would happen. By the end of the story, Bishamon had instead came across monks who helped lift the curse of the armour from him and seal away the armour before it could move again, leaving Bishamon to go home and live in peace with his wife, and the armour being kept alive under a tomb, leaving the story off on a very ominous note. Bishamon as a character is also really cool. I like his design, his fire red colour scheme, and the morality and innocence of the man underneath the armour that had been corrupted, leaving the character's entire arc off in a peacefully swift but also ominous ending as well. So unless we get someone taking over as the new host for the Hanya armour, its story has now came to an end. Anakaris is a mummy pharaoh who had been reincarnated as in search of building his kingdom, and is the 12th in his family to rule that said kingdom. After the events of Night Warriors and carrying over into this game, Anakaris goes out to the present time to prevent the threat of Jeddah and eventually moves him and his people away from danger after defeating Jeddah. Yeah, that's kinda it. He's sort of a straight to the point character much like Sasquatch, and yeah, he's a protector. And again, much like Sasquatch, I think it works. Where he does shine however is in his design, and it's about time we looked into that. So anyway, Anakaris visually is pretty damn cool. I really love his big hulking frame of a body that's able to twist and disconnect at any time and attack foes from all angles. I like his fearless personality since he has a slight shade of honour in his character despite being kinda barbaric. And his colours are very true to the Egyptian godlike design they're going for, with bright sand yellows and beiges accompanied with sky blues in his neem and belt thingy. So yeah, I like Anakaris, and again, new Darkstalkers game, would love to see him come back, and yeah, you're kinda getting the point at this point. But if it's one thing I'd love to see in a new game, it's to see how his kingdom is doing in a post Darkstalkers 3 game. So next is the greasy sweet mans with the groovy tones enough to make you bust... Oh wait, that's... Nah, not this Dimitri. We have the Romanian vampire Dmitry Maximov. Dmitry in the previous game had been in rivalry with Belial and was eventually casted out of Mackay for going against his ruler. During the story of Darkstalkers 3, Dmitry felt ready to go back for revenge against Belial, but instead he found Morrigan and decided to fight her. But just as Dmitry is about to suck the power and blood right out of Morrigan, she turns herself to stone and somehow becomes naked as a result. Okay, I mean it's Morrigan, of course she would. I mean, not like I'm complaining. And Dmitry is there waiting for her to eventually wake back up and fight her once again. And we may never see that cliffhanger get resolved because as of right now, well, what do you think? So as for Dmitry himself as a character, yeah, I like him a lot as well. What can I say? He's more ripped than a piece of paper and he's got a nice grey bodysuit with a red cape to fit in that medieval Victorian look. And it works really well for his personality in my opinion. Dmitry is the perfect counter to Morrigan, and I hope that someday that Capcom has a breakthrough in fighting games popularity. I don't know, like a successful Street Fighter 6, maybe a new Marvel vs. Capcom with Venom that has every single Marvel and Capcom character with their own movesets and such. And then, and only then, can we expect to have a slight hope to see this ending of Dimitri's to be resolved. But I gotta be frank guys, it doesn't look very likely. But let's have hope either way, okay? Next up is the German Frankenstein's monster character slot, Victor von Stroheim. I mean Gerdenheim. Yeah, I've been watching JoJo a lot recently, okay? So Victor is the creation of a doctor of the same name, and was dying of an illness. To impress his creator, Victor made the decision to go and fight around about the same time that the Darkstalkers went out to fight when the events of Night Warriors were happening. When Victor returned, he found out that his creator had died and that all that was left was his sister Emily, the prototype of Victor. In the events of Darkstalkers 3, Emily comes down with a sickness as well, and Victor, being all that she has left and vice versa, does everything in his power to collect souls and inject them into his deceasing sister. So when Victor does return, he makes the sacrifice to use his own life source and it carries over to her, giving her life and leaving Victor dead. Victor as a character is pretty good. I like his motives and caring personality, and his sacrifice at the end of the story is pretty heartwarming. As for his character though, I don't know, I would have made a few changes to his colours personally. I mean, the grey skin works and I like the green jacket with the brown accents, but the full-on brown trousers and shoes just don't really do it for me. I think a mainly green colour scheme with brown accents would have worked better personally, but other than that I don't mind his look too bad. So all in all, I don't think Victor is really coming back at all, and that's perfectly fine with me. I will admit that at first I didn't take a liking to him since he seemed a little generic as a Frankenstein's monster character, but by the time I finished his story mode, I sure don't not like him anymore. He died as he lived, a caring Frankenstein's monster. Wait, what? So, what happens when you combine Red Riding Hood with an SMG and many other weapons to kill Darkstalkers with? You get Baby Bonnie Hood. BB Hood is essentially what would happen when you take a little girl, weaponize her with deadly weapons, and allow her to make blood rain from the sky. So in Darkstalkers 3, she's just pulled into the Magijin by Jeddah for no reason, and just decides to go to town on creatures lurking around as a Dark Hunter would. Unlike Donovan Bane in the previous game, she's clearly a more bouncy and light-hearted take on the human character who hunts the Darkstalkers and just does it for fun, instead of having a vengeful reason like Donovan had. I'm really trying to not sound off as I'm underselling her, but that's it. She's only there because she loves hunting the Darkstalkers, and she's nothing more or less than that. A little girl who's just trigger and slasher happy, and she won't stop at nothing to quench her bloodthirst. So as for her personality and design, come on, she's a big laugh as a character, and I absolutely love her concept. I like the innocent girly dress she wears, I like the red and white colours, although the red on her can be seen as a reflection of her wanting to spill blood, and everything about her is badass and cute bundled together. It's kinda genius in a way if you ask me. So yeah, it's pretty safe to say Bonnie here is a fan favourite for some, and she'd definitely come back in a future installment. Even just to mess around if she doesn't do anything serious or constructive in the story. Next up is the Catwoman who became a pop star, and then a nun, Felicia. No, that's Felicia Hardy, you tumble dryer. But you're close. You're so damn close. Yeah, Capcom, you were pretty close to a lawsuit with that, you know. Then again, with the whole Iron Maiden thing, yeah, you're kinda worth Lord Raptor as well, so... So anyway, with the events of Darkstalkers 3, Felicia gets put into the Magi-Jin dimension along with the others and takes on Jeddah. And by the end of her journey, she creates an orphanage to care for children and wants to spread happiness across the world as she's always wanted to do. An interesting contrast to Lord Raptor, who wishes to kill and was formerly known as a rock star. Apart from that, Felicia isn't really given any reason to fight other than the kindness of her heart, and I have no problem with that. Like, at all. So in her design, how do I analyse her without coming off as a pervert? Well, she has a nice... tail?
Pussy.
Alright, look, Capcom wanted to make a sexy cat character, and damn it, she's one of the most iconic characters from the whole series because of that fact. I do like her design all in all though. She's clearly able to express herself freely, and it works well for personality and becoming someone who believes in you, and wants you to do your very best in life. That and her white fur covers are up enough from being fully nude, and her long flowing blue hair that comes down from behind her helps add a bit more to her overall silhouette. So with the obvious sex appeal aside, I really like Felicia. She's a perfect example of a person destined for evil, but she found the light within herself to do what she thought was really right. And for this aspect alone, I can honestly commend Capcom for making a rather risky character like Felicia. And yeah, she's my third favourite character in this game. Not for the reason you might think though. Well, not entirely. Now we have the other side to Morgan, Lilith. So as I said earlier, when Morgan was born, she was realised as an S-class noble, which essentially meant that she held more power than she was expected to at a newborn state. And since Makai was in a struggle for power, her power was split into three sources. One would stay in Morgan, another would be inside Belial, and the third would be tucked away in a secluded space in Makai. And this power source would eventually grow into its own personality like I stated earlier. And when upon discovering the Magi-Jin realm, she feels overcome with joy that she's been born into a world, despite the evil intents that Jeddah has. And so by the end of her side of the story, she returns to Morgan, but doesn't actually become absorbed. Yeah, in this story, she instead becomes a ring that Morgan later wears around her knuckles, and somehow really wants to keep it on her for whatever reason at all times. And yeah, Lilith is really great too as a character. You really feel for this character since from her victory card she's loving the fact that she's just alive and she's always so blissfully unaware of the danger around her. Just prancing around and, well, just enjoying herself like a little kid on a shopping mall trip with their mum would do. And when we see her evaporate and not get the chance to go back into Morgan's body in this story, it's somewhat somber and a little sad to see this joyful girl with the attitude of a baby just, well, in a way, die. Her design and even personality takes on that of a much different form of Morgan herself. That, and in her design we can see that Lilith's body isn't as mature and developed as Morgan's. Instead she takes on the appearance of a younger girl and a grown woman. I like the consistency between her and Morgan by Lilith still donning the succubus suit too, but now with a nice blend of blue and red thrown in for good measure. And her hair being a nice hot pink to contrast Morgan's oceanic turquoise hair. The only real differences in Lilith's design is the diamond cut hole in her torso rather than Morgan's iconic love heart shaped hole. So all in all, Lilith is a really unique character to this game, and I kinda don't know if I would want her coming back or not. On one hand, if she were to come back, I think they could cook up some new ideas to make her grow into her own character or something like that. But what makes me like her nearly as much as I do is the fact that she's a one and done deal. A character that would belong to this story and this story only. Lilith is definitely a highlight from this game for me, and she definitely justifies for having as many fans as she does. Mainly because she's similar to Morgan with her lewd remarks for insulting the enemy's size in the victory cards, and in her story arc, definitely leaves a lasting impression on you by the end.
恐れてはいけない。私は最初であり、最後。
And finally we have Jeddah Doma, the main antagonist of this game. And without repeating much of what I've said already, I'm going to skip out on the story and focus on the character himself. Well, apart from one part of the story where Jeddah actually wins. Jeddah takes the entirety of the world's life force and pretty much turns the fetus of God into a demon. Yeah, this game is kinda spooky, hence why I'm reviewing it for this October. Jeddah, as we can see, is a male demon who wears a lot of dark clothing. Kinda like me, not to think about it. And wields a scythe and a whole armada of moves for fighting. He's essentially just the M. Bison of the series, and he works a whole lot better than Pyron from Darkstalkers the Night Warriors in my opinion. Jeddah himself takes on a very unique style of a trench coat, kinda like me, and he has extensive wings and nails that draw blood from his foes. Alright, that is something I can't do. So Jeddah works as a villain, I think. He's got a burning ambitious fire burning away in him, a goal that he set out to complete, and it's just overall the best head villain lead that I've ever seen a Capcom game have before. Okay, I will admit the Demon King from Devil May Cry 5 comes pretty close, but Jeddah Doma ya mama, okay? Alrighty then, the story in its entirety isn't the best it could have been, sure enough, because of limitations at the time. But for what it is, it does its job well, and it's brought us some of Capcom's most underrated characters that wouldn't get a proper credit until their inclusion in the Capcom Vs games. I swear, I've seen so many people praise the character designs of these games, like Morrigan, Felicia, and Shonko specifically, but more times than not, those people haven't played the actual Darkstalkers games themselves. Which is fine, don't get me wrong, but I really hope many get the chance to experience the actual Darkstalkers games through a collection or something in the future, since Resurrection really flopped by 1, not having all the content from before like the Chaos Tower did on PSP, and 2, it's a download only title. Really, Capcom, you couldn't have released this physically? Anyway, in terms of plot, it's pretty damn good. Takayuki. Okay, now as for the gameplay, this is new territory for me personally, since this is a classic arcade style fighting game, and I've never really tackled anything like this before, since I still consider myself casual at fighting games, obviously a little bit of Street Fighters, and since last year, this game. But I will go into the absolute bare minimum that's needed to be understood in order to fight in this, well, fighting game. So as for the main controls, it plays a lot like how you'd come to expect Capcom's fighting games to play. First of all, you can move in the usual 8 directions that Street Fighter can. And you have your defensive blocking moves by holding left or right away from the enemy as he or she is attacking you. Then you have your usual offensive moves. You can attack by pressing X as a light kick attack, square being a light punch jab, circle being another kick attack but this time it's medium, L1 acting as a hard punch attack, and R1 acting as a hard kick attack. L2 and R2 are just remapped to the circle button, I'm sure, and sometimes just for comfort, I do use them as an alternative occasionally when pulling off moves. Now personally, I don't mind the PlayStation 3 controller layout as I feel comfortable in pulling off moves in fighting games like Street Fighter 4 in this game, so I'm all good when it comes to this. However, I wouldn't mind investing in a peripheral that resembles an arcade style joystick and button layout, since they can help get the most out of these kind of fighting games since they're initially meant to be played on arcade machines. Especially since Darkstalkers initially debuted on there. As for mixing and matching with characters' abilities, there's all sorts of movements on the controller you can do, like shifting the D-pad or analog stick in an upward motion, and hitting X to activate Morrigan's Soul Fist, performing Raptor's Skull Sting by going up and down quickly followed up by an X, and BB Hood's Cheer and Fire by going right, down, downward facing the enemy with a light jab to have her shoot you with a machine gun, just to name a few. You can also pull off special moves too. This is when the special meter at the bottom left hand corner is full and you can unleash it. Then seeing what your character does by having them do stuff like Rico riding on the waves he sends in, Jeddah sending you under the stage to feast upon you, and seeing Lord Raptor go ham Evil Dead style with her chainsaw. Also, depending on the meter level, your character can use its energy to perform a harder hitting attack towards its competitor, meaning you can perform a harder hitting Soul Fist or Shadow Blade as Morrigan, or have Dimitri punt a harder hitting Chaos Flare. And then there's the Stonks function. It acts much like it does in any other fighting game like Smash Bros. Ultimate for example. And then there's grabbing, where you press any offensive button just as you dash forward with an enemy by double tapping right or left towards them, and seeing what the character will do to them, like level skeleton like move for wings and QB stinger. Oh, another thing by the way, one thing I learned when researching Capcom's fighting games, apparently Darkstalkers introduced a new move that was later introduced into Street Fighter 3. This being the ability to break through people's blocking. Not much else to say on that, just thought I'd mention it here. And that's about it. It's a very simplistic and straightforward fighting game engine, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It's addictive and fun, and getting to watch some of these characters cartoonishly bounce off each other is really satisfying to watch. Darkstalkers just doesn't give a damn either. It's clearly showing BB who'd slit the character's necks, Jeddah sucking blood right out of his fingertips, and half-naked zombie metal guitarists, a muscular vampire donning skin-tight suits, and, well, characters like Morrigan, Lilith, and especially Felicia just speak for themselves. This game was the 90s incarnate, and thy name was Darkstalkers 3, motherfather. I love every bit of this game's gameplay, and it was so good that I thought it was necessary just to buy it a second time. And this review is part of the reason why I did buy it again. Yeah, I'm not kidding. I was originally going to do this game for last year's Halloween, but alas, ain't the case, is it? So yeah, gameplay. Next up is the music for this game, and it was done by a man named EY. And man, in case you haven't found out by the fact that I use the character select theme as my outro, I absolutely love this soundtrack too. This game has a whole collection of catchy melodies that set all kinds of moods. From the whimsy of the deserted chateau, the pleasant night sands of Red Thirst, and the high up heights of the Tower of Arrogance, to the fast-paced carnage of the Iron Horse and the room where the fetus of God is. The soundtrack is a real good OST to listen to on a lunch break or on a trip while you're trying to relax in a public transport somewhere. It's absolutely great. The voice acting in this game, or what's there anyway, is all in Japanese, which is fine by me. But for as much as I am for being a snob on video game voice acting and criticising how they sound, will I bother here?
No!
I mean, it's a 90s fighting game. I don't really think voice acting is really that big of a deal as more story-heavy games later down the line in the decade. The game also implements these cartoonishly over-the-top slapstick sounds to coincide the bombastic animation, so it maintains that slight corny and lighter tone so it doesn't become generally scary and, I don't know, frighten people away and make it look generic. I mean, Mortal Kombat this is not. And as for its graphic fidelity, I think it's one of the finest looking Capcom fighters we've ever seen, in both art style and animation. It's all thanks to the newly created at the time CP System 2 chip that Capcom was flexing back in the early 90s for their arcade cabinets like Alien vs Predator, X-Men Children of the Atom, and of course Capcom Sports Club. Street Fighter 2, you dolts! It worked really well in Darkstalkers' favour too, as vibrant graphics and animation really shine at their peak here. And in my opinion personally, it's one of the games that utilise the system's potentials to its absolute fullest. In the background we see things like swinging spiked balls and strings in the execution level, the light shimmering in the concrete cave, the well done point of view when you're fighting on the Tower of Arrogance, and damn, there's so well blended colours in pretty much all the levels. The Fetus of God looks absolutely disgusting because the graphics and art style work into making it look disgusting. The city landscape in the just mentioned Tower of Arrogance looks like it's being faded away into the distance, and I need say no more. This game looks absolutely breathtaking, even today since pixelized animation is still prominent in gaming. And so folks, there we have it, Darkstalkers 3. Now where do I see the series going from here? Well, I hate to say it, but not really anywhere unfortunately. And believe me, I absolutely hate saying this so much, but it's not. I'm sorry. But Len, surely the Darkstalkers could get an appearance in the crossover stuff, right? It's not the end of the world. And no, my name isn't Shirley first of all, it's a bad joke. And second, did you even see Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite? That game has only one thing going for it. And that's freaking Venom. A DLC character. But you know what else it did well? And probably one of the only things that I've heard people say? We got to see Morgan and Jeddah in HD. In a cutscene. Doing stuff. Imagine that but as a Darkstalkers 4. Or maybe since this is hot off the oven tree nowadays. A remaster of Darkstalkers 3. Can you imagine seeing Morgan, Jeddah, Talbane, Felicia, Rico, QB, Victor, Lilith, Bonnie, Raptor, Dimitri, Anakaris, Shonko, the whole goddamn cast of this extremely underrated series in HD at 60 FPS with these models? I for one would absolutely sploosh over the mere thought of that. And would pre-order that shit day one without anything holding me back. Apart from my own money, of course, but you understand me. But as we see it now, I guess we'll just have to stay hopeful that one day we'll get something that isn't an art book. Anyway, I've been funny screaming Scottish man for the last good half of an hour, probably. I hope not. And I forbid you all a Happy Halloween.
Is it business that brings you here? Or pleasure?